Hi, and welcome to the show Warrior Moms. My name is Trina Rothman, actually, and I am joined in the internet studio, the virtual studio that we set up thanks to COVID-19. I'm joined here by mother and daughter duo, Becca and Ann, and we are going to discuss dyslexia tonight. This is something that is pretty like I guess it's a part of my life too because I'm actually dyslexic, and I know that it's pretty rare for females to be dyslexic, but I am, and I actually have a few female friends that are dyslexic too. So this is really something that's near and dear to my heart, and something that I find very interesting because it's not something we talk about a lot. So, Anne and Becca, why don't you go ahead and introduce yourselves?
Hi, I'm Ann, and I'm a dyslexia specialist, thanks to my daughter. And but I'm a teacher as well. And then I'm gonna let you introduce yourself.
I'm Becca, and I have dyslexia.
Hi,
Becca. And I'm so happy to be here to talk to you. Go ahead.
I'm glad to have both of you. It looks like we have a little bit of a delay though, so we'll try to compensate for that. So that way the people on the other end, or our viewers, won't get, I guess, confused with what we're saying. So you have a very interesting story and how you became a dyslexia expert. So why don't you tell us a little bit about how your Warrior Mom story unfolded?
Well, Becca's my only child, and I was a teacher. I was a reading specialist, actually, but I had not been taught anything about dyslexia. We knew about dyslexia, the history, if you know the history of dyslexia, people knew about dyslexia, but we were not taught much about dyslexia in college, and I'm old, so this is different now, but in college. And when I came through, it was very much whole language, not so much phonics based, and I was a reading specialist. So I thought, my daughter, who's very bright, I thought she's going to just read and it's going to be so great. She's going to love books. And no, didn't happen. And so,
well, I did love books.
She did love books. She did love books, but she only when somebody read them. And so in kindergarten, I volunteered. I was off that year because we were in transitioning with moving, and I volunteered in our kindergarten class. And one of my jobs was to read with the students, and everybody was moving right along, and not Becca. And she couldn't sound out words, and she was struggling very much. And I thought, well, part of that's probably because it's your mama working with you, and you know that sometimes doesn't work very well. So then we got to first grade. She still couldn't read, but she was making okay grades on her report cards because we did everything at home over again, basically. She would come home crying. And so I went to school one day and I said, I'm concerned because Becca can't read and she's not reading where she should. And the teacher told me, well, Becca can read. She read today in class. And I looked at Becca and I said, Becca? And Becca didn't say anything. And the teacher said, well, Becca, read what we read in class today. So here comes Becca. Now, something you have to know about Becca was that if you told her something or read something to her 3 years later, she could Paul Peer it back to you and turn the pages exactly like she was reading. And that's what she did. And I said, when did you read that, Becca? She said, today at school. So I flipped a few pages. You read this? And she said, no. And I said, well, can you read that for me? And she looked at it and she looked at it and she looked at it. And then she looked at me. She said, Mama, you know I can't read. And the teacher was shocked because Becca was smart enough to fool her. We keep going. Becca's still not reading in second grade. I'm asking for testing. They're not giving her testing because she's doing well in school. Well, she's doing well in school because she has school all day, and then she comes home and she has school all afternoon among her extracurricular activities. Third grade, same thing. Fourth grade, she looks at me and she said, I'm not going to school anymore. This would be in fourth grade. She says, I'm not coming to school anymore, Mom. I'm done. I'm done with school. I'm like, what? And she said, summer school. They can't teach it like I can learn it, and I can't learn it like I'm teaching it, like they're teaching it. And so you just go teach all day, and then when you come home, you can teach me school. And I'm like, no, because we were going to have a murder suicide at that point. I can tell you. And so we put her in private school for a year, and that helped her. She had a teacher that, was working with her more one-on-one during the day. The class was very small. They worked with her one-on-one during the day, so she wasn't totally exhausted like she was by the time I got to her. So that worked better. I could never get the school to test her ever because she was doing okay in school, so the district would never test her. So, and I was teaching in that district, so it was very hard for me because I couldn't go, you will test her. And I was worried about my job. So I went to another district and they offered me a dyslexia position. And I was like, yes, please. And they trained me. And when I went, we had to evaluate somebody with dyslexia that we thought was dyslexic. So I evaluated her and she came up just like, woo, 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 she's dyslexic. And her teacher that was one of her reading teachers was in the training as well, one of her ex-reading teachers. And she came up and she said, who was that because we had to present, that you evaluated? And I said, that was Becca. And she said, I am so sorry. And I said, well, I'm sorry too, because she's still struggling in reading and we could have gotten her help. Yeah. It was horrible. Many tears, many trials, much battering to her self-esteem. It was horrible.
A lot of struggles that could have been avoided.
Absolutely, yeah.
So, so then when I got the training, I could help her as well. And she did learn to compensate, but she didn't learn it through the school district that she was in.
Okay, are you guys still there?
Yes. Can you hear me?
Oh, yeah, sorry. It just got it just went dead for a second. Okay, I'm sorry. Continue. Okay.
So I try to be mindful of parents that are in positions too, because I know that it's hard. And when people tell you that, oh, your child it'll be next year. No, it's not going to be next year. It's got to be right now. It's really difficult. And it's difficult to have a child that can't read. And I was a reading specialist. It was embarrassing too. It was really difficult. And it was hard for her. And she told me when she was in college, she said, and I started crying because she told me, she goes, this is the first time I feel smart. And if you know Becca's a very, very smart girl, very smart. And I looked at her, I said, you didn't feel smart at school until now? Because she made, after we got her to high school, she made good grades. She did things on her own. I wasn't supporting her as much, but she really felt crushed with schooling. And it just breaks my heart because I don't want any child to feel that way.
Absolutely not. No, Becca, you should have felt smart because you fooled a teacher into thinking you could read. I mean,
everybody could do that.
I'm like you, and I can look at something, and then once I've looked at it, I have it's a photographic memory. I just have it in my head. And once I've heard something, I can hold on to it. Maybe that's something unique to dyslexics. I don't know.
A lot of dyslexics do that to compensate. That's how they compensate for things, because it's the print is just unbelievable for them. And so that is a coping mechanism that many dyslexic students have. But if you can imagine, some dyslexic students also have some auditory or visual memory issues. And if you compile that on with dyslexia, then that's really a pickle, for those students. Mm-hmm. So we really have to work and help them. Becca was lucky to be able to, and colleges are so much better than public schools because they have writing centers. So you can go and somebody will look at your writing and help you with your writing and things like that. And then we tell kids in high school, you should be able to do it yourself, you know, and
Well,
that makes it difficult.
and to be perfectly honest, the public schools that I went to, it was all regurgitation of the information that you were taught. There was no critical thinking that was ever taught. So when I got to college and I actually had to read the text and understand it and, you know, break it down and really digest it before I got to class so that I could participate in the conversations, because that's what I like to do. That's how I learn, is to interact with the material. It was really difficult for me because that was the first time that I had to like really apply myself. Whereas before that, I could just spit out information and be fine.
Well, and she also could use audiobooks. So, and that was helpful for her. And then, and you know, Becca's a critical thinker and she will participate in class. So that was helpful for her in college as well, because her professors really were like, oh, you're going to participate in class? That's awesome. You know, that's helpful. So, but it was a struggle. Go ahead.
No, I was just agreeing.
Oh, okay. And so, you know, we've just been, she would go to school for her 7 hours, come home, and then we would do school for 3 to 4 hours every night. So she ended up with 11 hours of school every day, you know, and then we had the typical mother-daughter thing. So she would go, you're not right. And I'm like, I'm the department head. I wrote the lesson plans. I know I'm doing the math right. And she would be like, no, you're not. We had that whole thing going on. It doesn't matter if you're a teacher, you still have that. And so, so
That's how that works.
yeah, you don't do it like that. That's not what my teacher said, you know.
That's not how she showed
Yeah.
it.
So, you know, we had those difficulties as well. And then she was dancing. And so then there was dance time in there. She was just very busy and it was hard. And, you know, I didn't want to pull her out of the extracurricular activity because that's where she got her self-esteem from. So, and, you know, that took up time as well.
So, once you got Becca, I guess you were able to. I'm sorry, I just like totally, my brain just like totally fell apart for a second. So once you were able to test Becca and you confirmed that she had dyslexia, what was it like for her after that? What was the how did she catch up? How did things happen for her?
Well, you know, I helped her put her through a program that a dyslexia program at home. We did it. Mm-hmm. And that helped her to compensate with her reading, because what we know now is that if we look at kids before they have intervention, they've done fMRI studies. So if we look at brain research, we can see that if we look at a successful reader and we look at their brain, they use certain parts of their brain to read with. And then if you look at a dyslexic reader, they use completely different parts of their brain to read with. So after after dyslexia intervention, and I use an Orton-Gillingham. Right now I use NIHOUS. Then I didn't have NIHOUS training, but Orton-Gillingham procedures, you can actually rewire the brain, and we can go back and look at MRI studies of those same kids, and their brain really works in a more successful, sorry about the cat, more like a successful reader after they go through the intervention program. So it's amazing. And these kids are able to be successful readers. You know, kids have always compensated for dyslexia. And you see a lot of people who we see in the arts a lot when we look at famous people like Tom Cruise and Whoopi Goldberg and those kind of people who are dyslexic. But there are people in all walks of life who are dyslexic. There's James Horner, who's a famous paleontologist. And I saw him speak one time, not in person, but over the internet. And he said something about somebody asked him, well, how do you write all these papers? Because he's very dysgraphic as well. And he writes all of these papers and all this stuff.
Constantly publishing.
Yes, constantly publishing. And he said, that's why you have grad students. I can dictate everything in and they do all the other stuff. So, I mean, dyslexic people are smart people and they figure out how to get around what they need to get around in order to be successful. But I can't imagine, and when I look at kids, I can't imagine these kids. I've seen kids in junior high that they've gone to school now for 9 years, 8 or 9 years with these stumbling blocks, and they struggle and they struggle. And yet they still come to school trying every day. They still come to school and really they're putting 150% in because their brain has to work harder than everybody else's brain in order to do the same thing that everyone else is doing. And it's tiring. And if you do what they did, I would have shut down and told somebody to go take a hike, probably like Becca did in 4th grade, and I wouldn't have hung in there, you know. But they come and they do and they work and they want to be successful, and God bless them because they need somebody on their side. And those parents are frustrated because they know their kids are smart and they know their kids can do better than what they're doing. And you know, the sooner we can get intervention for those kids, 1st grade, 2nd grade, the more successful they're going to be. Studies show that.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so a question I have for you. So what for dyslexic children, what's the age that the state would allow testing? Like if a teacher in kindergarten says, I think this child might be dyslexic, will they test in kindergarten, or is there a certain age that they wait to?
Here's the beauty of what's happening now that we didn't have when Becca was little. So the state now does a screening in kindergarten. We didn't get it done in a lot of places last year because of COVID, but they do a screening and they look at kids reading, and then they're tagged for potential problems with dyslexia, and then they're monitored unless it's severe and they decide to go ahead and test them. Then they're monitored in 1st grade, and if they still have a deficit, then they need to be tested in 1st grade. So they're screened both in kinder and in 1st grade, and then possibly in 2nd if they're still, like if they pop up in 1st grade and they need to be screened again in 2nd grade. So we have those early interventions or those early little clues in place to help. A lot of times parents don't know that, you know, if your child is not being successful and on track in kinder, 1st and 2nd, that there might be an issue, and that's helpful for them. But if you're concerned, you can always request a dyslexia screening, and the district has to comply now.
Okay.
And so they have to comply if you request it. And you can go through Child Find and request a dyslexia survey. That's what the state says, and that's a good thing. And now what they will do, they'll look at your request. And now if your child is reading on level, if you request the dyslexia survey, your child is reading on level, everything is good with all their test scores, everything's rocking along with their grades, they may say testing is not warranted at this time, and they may refuse your test. But if we're looking at like the screening, and the screening is low, they're low in their test, that they have to look at data as well. Most parents aren't taking their kids that are like superstar readers and asking for dyslexia screening. So, but you know, the districts do have that option to say, we feel like the testing is not warranted at this time, but they have to tell you why, and you can then argue that.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
And then in 6th and 7th grade, if students are failing their STAR test in 6th grade and 7th grade, they will do a reading assessment at that point and determine if any further intervention needs to happen at that point. You know, sometimes kids, when they get junior high age, they regress. Sometimes they've done really, really well because they're good at the memorization, or maybe they have enough reading competency to get them through. But then when they hit that 5th and 6th grade, they've hit the wall of what they can do with their compensation. And so that's a great place for them to get, and then they may need to have some intervention at that point. So the state looks at their, or your school should look at their 6th grade test, and if they didn't pass, then they'll do a reading assessment. And, but sometimes kids just fail a test. Maybe they were sick that day. Maybe they were, maybe something traumatic happened. Their dog got run over, God forbid, or whatever. And so they were off that day of testing. So you may have a kid that has done well all the way through, but then 6th grade that day they were getting the flu or something, and they weren't showing any signs yet, and they took the test and they bombed it. Well, that will show up when they do the reading assessment that no, everything's okay. So, and that has to happen at the beginning of the 7th grade year.
Okay. Okay. So, what do interventions look like? What stuff that the school can do for children with dyslexia?
Okay. So, the reading intervention program will have some sort of phonological awareness, phonemic awareness. That's where you're looking at basically dyslexia. Let me back up and talk to you about dyslexia. Dyslexia is it's not a visual problem. Some people have thought it was a visual problem. It's not. It's a language problem. It's a reading problem. And so it happens within that language area of your brain. So you're not, it's a sound symbol relationship. So when they see the letters, it's the making of the sound is the problem, and decoding the words and making that fluency of reading, because having to decode is an issue, because when the dyslexic kids read, they're usually trying to decode every single letter.
Yeah, you're literally looking at each letter and trying to make the sound, and then going, oh, that's not the sound. I have to back up and make that a blend.
And then when you get to the end of like a sentence, well, you've spent so much time looking at every single letter to decode, then you've lost your meaning.
Exhausted.
So you don't have any comprehension skills. Mm-hmm. So it's very hardcore in sound symbol relationship, which we call phonemic awareness. We break the sounds down, the word down into its phonemes, which are the sound symbols like S says, T says, T, M says, M. And phonological awareness is how words work. And then so we look at morphology of words, which is like root words, base words, suffixes, prefixes, those kind of things. You look at, there's a reading comprehension usually part, there's a fluency part, there is spelling is huge, because I used to tell her she couldn't spell her own name. She couldn't spell her way out of a paper bag. I mean, spelling is really hard for dyslexic kids because it's a sound symbol relationship. When you're trying to, write, that's hard. A lot of times writing for dyslexic kids are hard, getting that. So there's a writing component usually within the, to help them plan out, to get their thoughts down on paper. Mm-hmm. So all of those things are parts of the process. So we start usually adding on. So we start with the phonemic, the phonological awareness. Like if I say cat, I want you to repeat the sound. So we'll do this. Say cat.
Cat.
Break it down into parts. Ah.
Ah.
If I take the k off and add, what word do you have?
Cat.
That would be a phonological awareness lesson. Okay. So it's playing with words and word sounds and sounds within words. Rhyming. I never knew it, but like when she was 3 years old and we would read Dr. Seuss and I would stop and usually the kid can put in the word. No. If I said roses are red, violets are blue, whatever, and I love, and she would say turkey. I don't know. I mean, it would be like, wouldn't make any sense, and it wouldn't.
But it'd be amazing.
Okay. And then we add a spelling component. Usually the spelling first starts out with spelling the letter sounds, so you go all the way to the beginning and you have to go you have to teach it to them. They can't just figure it out. You have to teach all the way down to the smallest sound.
And even now it's mind-boggling to me because I now have a kindergartner who is working on these things. And I have to send him to mom and go, okay, mom, you teach him and I will sit here behind you and watch. So
Yeah, she's just teaching him how to sound out words from the back. And I'm like, no.
You know, I as far as like my dyslexia went, I guess I was able to fool teachers the same as Becca was, all the way up until I got into high school and I started to realize that a lot of my issue is numbers, and I don't see numbers. I just don't process numbers the same way that other people do. And it was so frustrating and so hard for me. But I had a good teacher who caught it, and he just, I mean, his name is Mr. Russo, and he caught it and he helped me. And, but one thing that my parents, they just did not understand. They just were like, well, I don't understand. You do really well in school. Why couldn't you figure this out? Why did your grades tank? So something that I unfortunately didn't have was understanding parents. So if, so what would be good for parents to understand about their child with dyslexia? Something that they can support their child with, and be able to understand and empathize with their child.
To identify, is that what you're saying?
to empathize.
Oh, to empathize. Okay. So I think you need to realize this is, let me address a couple of things you said. Within dyslexia, there's dyslexia, the reading, there's dyscalculia, which is the math part, and there's dysgraphia, which is the reading part. So the state doesn't recognize dyscalculia, but they recognize the other two for intervention. So just to let you know that. I think that parents need to know that your child is not just being lazy. I mean, I talked to a teacher one time and gave a presentation, and it's a teacher that I know that I considered a very good teacher. She was a math teacher, and she came out crying and she said, really, I just kind of thought they were lazy. I didn't really realize that that's what all they dealt with, you know. And even though I've been talking about it, they really do put in 150%. I mean, it takes everything out of them, and it's tiring.
Mm-hmm.
And you know, headaches are not uncommon, because you're tired, and physical things can manifest. Also, ADHD is very commonly comorbid with dyslexia. So on top of the poor babies having difficulty reading, then sometimes focusing can be a problem. Impetuousness can be a problem, all of those things. So you have to work on both of those. So, you know, sometimes it's hard to see whether it's a ADHD problem or whether it's a dyslexia problem or whether it's a combination of the both. They sometimes look similar. Mm-hmm. If your child is at home and they're doing the best they can and they can't finish something, let teachers know. Have an open communication with the teachers. I would say 99.9% of those teachers want to know what's going on and want to hear from you. Tell them they're not, you know, we're struggling with this. What can we do? Can they listen to an auditory book? Can we do half of the problems instead of all of the problems? Can we type it instead of write it? Can we do text to speech where I can say it into the computer and it can write it down, because they can't, you know, they're losing their thought process in trying to write it down. So keep an open dialogue with the teacher, and that way you can see what things are working and what things are not working. So when you go into those 504 or those ARD meetings, you can have a list of, this is what I need, this is not working with my child, this frustrates them. I've had students that are frustrated with text to speech. They don't want that. They'd rather write it down. I'm like, I don't know why you want to do that, but if that's what you want, then let's do it that way. They'd rather have somebody read them something in person rather than listen to it auditorily. You know, there's different things, but talk to your child and talk to the teacher. Keeping an open line with the teacher, that's really important. And let your child know that you know that it's difficult, and let them know that they are special, because most dyslexic kids have something that they're good at, like math. A lot of dyslexic kids are good in math, or they're good in science, or they're good in history. They just stink at reading. And so maybe they're really good at science, but maybe the reading's just difficult for them. So maybe you can read it to them, or maybe they can get it on tape, and then you can discuss all that and go into depth with them. We used to read, I'd read a page, she'd read a page. I'd read a page, she'd read a page. By the time she read the page, we'd have to go over what everything was in the page because she didn't remember at the end of the page. But we did that a lot. Sometimes it was paragraph. Sometimes it was paragraph page.
Yes, that's the one I remember.
Sometimes it was sentence page. It just, it would just depend on how in depth it was.
And how much energy I had.
Yes. Because they're tired from school. It's tiring. And just think, if you did your job and it took you twice as much to do your job, and then you had to come home and still work, what that would be like. And that's what these kids are dealing with. On top of, if they're in junior high, then they have that whole other hormonal, where they're not real people. And so that, then that's a whole nother issue to deal with. I don't mean they're not real people, but they've got some hormones going on. They're my favorite people, but they're not real people. So,
no,
but,
kind of.
But that would be my main thing, is just be there for your child, but make sure you're doing it in a way for the teachers that you're asking for their help. Because sometimes they feel like toes are stepped on. I always wanted help. I always wanted my parents to let me know what was going on. Please, can you let, this didn't work. But, I'm not every teacher either.
Right.
But if you can, and with parents, I would say what works best with you. I would ask my parents, give me information about your child because you know them better than I do. So, and I had a lot of parents that would come in and say, here's my kid, and would just give me a list or send me an email at the beginning of the year. Here's what goes on. Here's the best way they learn. These are, even before I got any paperwork from anybody else. And that was a blessing for me, because then I could start off the year on a good foot and be prepared for their child, to give them the best environment.
Yeah, that's really good. That's something that we also talk about on the show, is how, just knowing your child, having that open communication. And this is more, I guess, for just any parent, not just a parent of somebody who has dyslexia or epilepsy. It's always so important to have that open line of communication, and then to be able to know your child, because that's how you find out the things that are wrong or not right with your child. So yes, I love it that those parents would help you out with that. I try to do that with my daughter's teacher as well. I text her and I tell her, this is where we're at. These are the things that are going on. We have a seizure this weekend. She's probably going to be tired. It's very, very important to have that. And so I really like that you said that, that's how the best way that parents can advocate for their child if they have dyslexia, is just to have an open communication. That's not hard. It's really not hard to do. So
no, and even if you just have one teacher, like I was the dyslexia teacher for a long time, but even when I wasn't, I was always a point person. But if you have one teacher that's the point person, because people have more than one kid, people have kids who have multiple problems, people have it's hard out there to be a parent. So if you have a teacher who's willing to be a point parent and distribute information, then that works too. But nowadays with email, where you can just tag everybody, that's really nice. So
yeah, so let me ask you, have you guys figured out, because as far as I know in my family, I'm the first person who's dyslexic. We think my dad may have been, but is it hereditary?
There is a hereditary component, and we think she has it on both sides.
Okay. So that's interesting. Now, the language part of the brain, is that the temporal lobe?
Say that again.
The language part of the brain, is that the temporal lobe?
It's the broncha area.
Okay. Okay. I was just curious. That's just my own personal question.
It's not broncha. I'm like telling you the broca, BROCA,
Okay.
broca.
And so do you have any like tips or tricks for the person in daily life who has dyslexia? Is there anything that you would say, like this might make your life a bit easier to do these different things?
That's a good Becca question.
I really think being easier on yourself and understanding that your brain works differently, you make connections differently, and that's okay, is something that I had a hard time with. I knew my brain worked differently. I knew that I could understand things, but showing that understanding or getting there sometimes was just so much more work than everybody else around me. And it was disheartening sometimes because I would look at all my peers and say, I know that I'm as smart as them. How come they're understanding it and I'm not? And knowing that your brain just works differently and that you're going to get it, you just have to find that different pathway to get there, makes it easier. Once I got into high school, I became the person that people would go to and say, okay, I didn't understand this, but you seem to get it. What is this theory or what is this issue? And I would pull something out of nowhere, give them an example of it, and they'd go, oh.
Because she's good with metaphors and things like that. Yeah, she has good critical thinking.
And that's just how I learned things, was I would connect weird things together and go, okay, well, the element copper, the periodic symbol for that is Cu, because back when I was little, I used to watch Fox and the Hound, and the fox would always go, Cu, copper, like things that don't really make any sense, but they help you remember and they make those connections. I've seen a lot of dyslexic people have that.
Yeah. Mnemonic devices are good, songs are good, things like that for learning. I think sometimes that when we call it a disability, it's harsh for kids. So I like to call it a neurodiversity. I saw that term and I'm like, that's a really good term. Your brain is not disabled. There's nothing wrong with your brain. It's perfectly functional. It just works in a different way. And there's nothing wrong with that. And so, just knowing that and reaffirming that helps. Also, Becca, we used to laugh because I called her room the black hole. I wouldn't even go in there. I'm like, oh, go get it out of the black hole, because
my backpack too.
Yeah, because the dyslexic kids, you're laughing because dyslexic people are usually have difficulty with organization, and they have to learn it. And then, but once they learn it and once they use it, it's their best friend. And now you should see, like, her planners look like a piece of artwork. They're beautiful. And I'm like, I'm scribble scratched all over, but hers are beautiful. And she uses them all the time.
Every day.
So she went from the black hole to Leonardo da Vinci planner. So that's pretty good.
I'm also a part of like several planner communities. I'm kind of crazy.
I actually know somebody who's a crazy planner person too. So, and it's not me. It's definitely not me, because my organization, like you saw yesterday, or the day before, I was trying to find a pen for like 5 minutes, because if something is moved from the way that I have it, then I don't know how to cope otherwise. And so, yeah, and so like and then like, 'cause I think my husband thinks I'm just nuts, because he was like, if something is moved, I'm like, it has to be where I put it, because if it's not there, the whole like grand scheme of things has now been skewed, and I don't know my place in the world. So I'm very picky about where things go because, again, like, it's going to mess me up. But I'll never put my shoes or keys in the same place twice. So I don't know.
Okay, well, she never puts anything in the same place twice, and she used to drive me crazy because I'm like you. He would call me Mary Poppins because Mary Poppins always says a place for everything and everything in its place. And I would go, where are my scissors? It was always my scissors. Where are my scissors? In my room. We'll go in that black hole and find them. And she'd say, okay, Mary Poppins, because, you know, I couldn't. She took my scissors all the time.
She would go into my room and look for an hour and look and look and look and look and look and look. Go into that black hole and find my scissors. I know they're somewhere in there. And so I'd go in and like 5 minutes, like, here you go, Mom. They were right there.
It looked like a TV show Hoarders. It was horrible.
Well, I think that's also a teenager, though. Like you said, she's your only child, so you didn't have anybody else to compare her to. But I think that is more of a teenager thing because I have 3 kids in my house. One is mine. 2 are my brothers that they live with us, and it's like that across the board. I mean, Scarlett to my 8-year-old niece. Gosh, just that whole the whole gambit. They're all like that. That's something that I want to talk to you about. Is I want to hear it. We've heard a little bit about what we heard a lot from your mom because she's the dyslexia expert, but we didn't hear your side of things other than how frustrating it was, which I empathize with. But what is it that you would like to share with everybody? What would you like to share with the class today?
Just, I guess, just keep persevering, keep trying new ways to do things. One of my favorite theories right now is called lean. And it's the way that the Toyota factories work. So when they make their cars, they will take something away and see if we can still make this same car without this one part. Can we still make this car work? And so they're constantly taking things out so that their cars are more simple or that the process is more simple. And so, but the whole idea is just, if there's something that's bothering you, if there's something that's not working right, rather than continuing to do the same thing over and over and over again, fix it. Stop and fix it. So, even if it's a process of, okay, well, I come home and I do my homework and I get angry and then everything blows up. Well, okay, that's a process that's not working. Maybe you need to come home and eat a snack first and then start your homework. Or maybe you need to be in a different area to do your homework. Or maybe because Mom had, I don't even know if this is a thing anymore, but after we found out that I was dyslexic, we had these different color overlays so that I could put them over my white paper, and it made it easier to read. Mm-hmm. Just a simple,
Well, it was just anti-glare. It just the glare sometimes on the paper gives you a headache, and so that was helpful.
But it's just a simple, what's frustrating you? Figure out a solution. And if you can't figure out a solution, reach out to people who might be able to. And I think that that's really been something that I've done kind of my whole life. If it didn't work, I was going to fix it. If my training wheels were still on my bike and I had to wait for Dad to get home, I'll figure out how to take those training wheels off myself.
Yeah, I'm the daughter of an engineer, so I the same way. It's interesting that you said the thing about the filter. Something that I've had to do is I obviously can read books and all that good stuff, and I'm an avid reader, but I like to read on a tablet with the blue light filter off. And then I also like to have, instead of a white background, I like to have either a colored background like a green background or even a black background, because I feel like it helps my brain be more calm. And so even on my phone,
I like
I have my
background as well.
What?
Yeah. I like a black background as well. To me, it's easier on your eyes, I think.
Yeah.
But that's a
Yeah,
preference thing.
Yeah, my whole phone is that way. Everything is a black background, and I feel like it really helps me process things, and not necessarily like just I don't know, like the white background on electronics. It's just too bright for me. It's just too bright. Becca, now something I wanted to really have on the show is because or have this part of the show, and it's important that I ask the question that I'm going to ask because in the special needs community, there are a lot of kids that are not verbal. They are unable to communicate to their parents, hey, I appreciate that you are doing this for me, mom. I like, even still, like as an adult, you know, I don't necessarily, like as a child, you don't necessarily see that with your parents or articulate it to your parents. But when you're an adult, you get older and you look back and you're like, oh man, my mom really fought for me there. My mom really did this for me, or my dad did this for me. I really should thank them. And it's something that you look back in retrospect. But I know that these children, they hear their parents fight for them, even though they cannot talk or communicate the thoughts cohesively. And I know that when they become adults, that they would still want to communicate this to their parent. So knowing that your mom did everything that she could for you to help make sure that you were able to read and be a successful student and be a thriving child. What is it for you to be an adult and realize that? I mean, can you articulate that in any way for us?
I know for a fact I wouldn't be where I am at all if I didn't have my mom advocating for me 210%. She was constantly behind me and cheering me on, but she was also fighting for me. She was doing everything that she could, researching everything that she could to make sure that I had every opportunity that I could to make, the best of all my choices. And I knew that, and I saw other people's parents, and I never felt like they had that same support. Like I felt that because I needed that extra support, mom stepped up and she was more of a go-getter. She was more involved and more in tune with what I needed than a lot of my friends' parents were. Not that they didn't love their kids. That's not anything what I mean, but just there ended up being a stronger connection, I think, because of the battles that we had to fight together.
Well, we had to fight a lot of battles because Becca not only had dyslexia, she had a seizure disorder when she was growing up, and then she had cancer. So we've had to fight quite a few battles together. And so, but the dyslexia was our first battle. And it made us very close because we had to be together so much with school.
But it also allowed me to know that there's no doubt in my mind that if I have a problem, I can always go to mom. I know that she will help me work through it. I know that she will stand up for me. I know that, she's my net. She's going to catch me if I need to be caught. And not in a like, well, I can't do anything for myself. But when I get to my wit's end and I don't know what else to do, I can look to her for support. And she almost always has a different viewpoint of, well, did you think of this? And then that, that spurs me on another road of, okay, well, let's go look into these things. Or she's like, oh, I just found this information. Here's all of the sources that I have, or hey, did you think of this? She's constantly, and not just for me, but for my kids, constantly finding information to help us and to make us be the best we can be, which is awesome.
Wow. But I see you fighting for your kids too. And Becca's a warrior mom as well. And she fights for her son at school. We've had some things we've dealt with. He's got ADHD, and oh my goodness, does he have ADHD? And, she has really stepped up to the plate. It's impressive to watch her.
It's hard to be that mom who has a kid whose brain just works differently. And that if other people could see their soul like you see their soul, they would love them. But there's this outer core that a lot of people have a hard time getting past. And if you can help them get past that to their soul, it creates such an opening experience for that relationship between that child and that other person. It's something that I fight for on a regular basis with anybody who's supposed to be any kind of mentor to.
Well, it's a blessing for the adult. That's what the adult has to look at when they build a relationship and a bond with children. And so if you're not there for that, then maybe that's not the place for you to be. But that's a whole nother podcast we could do.
Yeah, I love that. That's why we have this podcast, because we want people to realize that our children are wonderful people, and you should look past the disability. Like, it's not who they are. It's just, I always say Scarlett has epilepsy. Epilepsy doesn't have Scarlett. And when we talk about medication and the doctors are talking to us and they're like, oh, she failed Pepra. Oh, she failed this. No. Pepra failed my child. Like, that's what this is. Pepra is a prescription drug. My child didn't fail it. It failed her because it was created for her, not the other way around. And so there's things that I want these parents of special needs children to realize that they're not alone. Their child is more than their disability. And that's why we have this show for those parents, and then for parents of what I call neurotypical children, or just normal children, and so that they can see, hey, look, your even though your child is socially normal, or my child is too. She's just a little bit different, and together they could have a lot of fun. They can do a lot of different things. Not everybody is the same. If everybody was the same, the world would be boring.
Exactly.
Yeah. So that's why I wanted this show, and that's why I wanted to have these moms on here, moms like you guys, come on here and talk to people, because one, you're not alone, and two, we need to just raise awareness for the community so that way people are more accepting. So I thank you guys very much for coming on the show tonight. I want to open it up to questions. It looks like we have a little bit of a delay. So any question for Becca or Anne, if you have a child that you suspect may have dyslexia, or you just have more questions about dyslexia in general, please go ahead and ask those. We'll open the floor up for questions, and then once we get through the questions, we'll go ahead and wrap. But I thank you so much for being on the show tonight, and thank you, Becca, for reaching out to me to tell me about your mom's story, and how it's like now it's a kind of like a second generation story, because you have your own battle with your son that you're trying to break through. And ADHD, I tell a lot of people, because I talk to people with within the Canvas community, because ADHD is something that comes up quite a bit. You're right, brain works just differently, and if you can find a way to reach that brain, you can open that child up, and when people think differently, there's so much innovation and so much that can come from it. And so I really like that people are just now, I like that people are realizing that ADHD isn't a bad thing. It's not. It's just a different version of a brain. Mm-hmm. So I'm just looking for questions if anybody has any, so that way we can address it live. If not, Anne has agreed to come back and answer questions if anybody has someone who watches on the replay. So, or maybe I just volunteered her to do that. So maybe that's the case.
I'm good. I'll come back and answer questions anytime. I love talking about dyslexia, so as you can tell. So I can talk days.
I know we just scratched the surface. So
Yes.
Yeah. So are there any, I should ask this, are there any resources that people should reference, like that you could send me the links to, so that way I could,
I will send you some links. I can send you some links to Night House. They have some excellent resources on their website. Some of the TEA stuff. I'll send you some books that people can read. I'll send you some.
That sounds good. I see that Molly Smith just commented. She says, this is not a question. I just want to say that our ISD, I went ahead and redacted that because I don't want to say which ISD and get anybody in trouble. But our ISD has been blessed and is still to have Anne. So I probably just read that way wrong. Let me look at it again. Not a question. Just want to say that our ISD has been blessed and is still blessed to have Anne. So yes.
Well, thank you.
It's definitely good to have people in their positions who are passionate about what they're doing. And it's very apparent that you're passionate about dyslexia and helping others.
Thank you. I've really enjoyed this. This has been so nice and so easy to do. And it's nice to talk to people about what's going on. And I'm a big advocate for students and for families. And so I'm very happy to do this.
Oh, good. I'm so glad that you guys were on tonight.
I am too.
Thank you. And Becca, thank you so much for being on the show too, again, for reaching out to me to tell us your stories. But I don't see any questions coming through. So if you guys are good, I'm just going to say a quick thing about next week's episode, and then we'll finish it up. So next week we have Ida back. We are actually going to discuss what it means to be a warrior mom. So not just a mom of a special needs child, we're going to expand on the warrior mom concept because warriors come in different shapes and sizes and they all have different battles that they face. So that's what we're going to discuss next week on our episode. And then coming up, we have some other really great things. Like I think I've told you that we're going to have an attorney come on in August. And then we also have a mom who advocates for their child on a personal level, and then she the legislators and things like that. So she's going to come on to the show. We've got a really great lineup moving forward. I'm still looking for a dietitian, but I've spoken to an epileptologist, and so hopefully we'll have her on the show soon. And then I've reached out to some other big name warrior moms that a lot of people are aware of. So hopefully we'll have some really great announcements moving forward. But once again, thank you guys so much for being on the show. And I hope that everyone has a wonderful evening. And it's been a wonderful episode of Warrior Moms. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Trina.
Oh, you're very welcome. You guys have a good evening.
Thanks, you too.
Thank you. Bye.